CPWE.biz and CPWE.AI. Tonight I have Greg Hyatt on from ArcWebDesign.net and ArcWeb Hosting. He is a seasoned veteran as a website administrator and all things websites and to the deeper aspects as well. But tonight we wanted to go over what it's like to start an AI agency and kind of where we're at the moment as we have done building this from scratch on live air. So, Greg, if you were to give a new business owner a trajectory to say if they wanted to start a media agency for themselves and add AI into their business, someone who may want to do something like that, what would be the trajectory that you would lead them down on a path?
The very first thing is for them to define who their target or desired client is. Just because you're an agency, and I really don't care what market you're in, but any agency, any business, you got to know who it is you want to attract as your ideal customer. And I think a lot of people think, well, any customer is a good customer. Well, that's not true. I mean, customer agency relationships, to really make them blossom, have to blend together like apple pie and ice cream. It's got to be that kind of relationship. Otherwise, something spoils, goes south. One person gets mad, and the story just gets old. That's the first thing. Find out who your ideal client is. Then begin, of course, if we want to go clear from scratch, obviously branding. What does your business, what does your agency look like? How do you want it to look like that resonates and stick in a potential customer's mind? Because it's that identity that will begin to resonate not only with them, but as you begin to build your line of business, it will resonate with other people. It's called brand identity.
So before we go further, I want to stay on target customer real quick. Here's why, because that's the one people skip. This niche idea, meaning an ideal avatar, say it's a realtor or a bank or a plumber, or maybe it's Fortune 500 companies, whatever your ideal customer is for your product, you cannot skip this step. It has ultimate bearing. So let me give you an example and a story of something that's happened to us. So our ideal customer is public, not government. However, it usually overlaps with government. Therefore, there's a couple things that we need to know about our ideal customer. What are their requirements that they're under currently for their IT or their software requirements? Here's a great example of that. If you build AI software with a tool like Bolt or your vibe coding and you create code and you don't know certain aspects of that code, if it meets criteria of, say, NASA's 10 rules for software development, would you need that level of requirement for NASA's 10 rules of software development? Or, here's probably a bigger one for anyone who's going to be overlapping critical industry. How about DARPA's formal procedures for software development? It's very mathematical. You have to write your code a certain way, and you have to ideally grab each function and know its lifeline, where it ends. It has to be definitive.
Well, not does your code have to be definitive to meet their purposes, what the requirements are, but you as an agency, and again, this is far above just being an AI automation agency, but you have to ensure what your deliverables are will scale and can match what their internal processes and requirements are. Because if you can't deliver on that or have the manpower to back you up to deliver on that, you could shoot yourself in the rear end real quick trying to land these bigger type of contracts. But if you do, then again, it's about, do we mesh as far as an agency versus client, client versus agent? Because remember, it's two-sided. It's not just one way. It's not always about what tickles an agency's rear end. I mean, it's two feathers tickle each other. And that you got that cohesive inner working relationship to whereas their demands may change, and realize that some of their demands may change as quick as whatever they told you today could be something completely reverse engineered tomorrow. Nature of the beast. But you have to be willing to flow like that and have the processes and team set in place to be able to deliver upon that. So you got to roll with the flow and be willing to accept those kind of demands. Uh, as long as everything else meshes and gels, you just found yourself a future, potentially lifelong client.
And that's what we want. And taking that word agile and introducing that right where Greg was saying, being nimble, being flexible, being open minded, being pliable as a company, because these regulations are changing. If we were to label this tonight, what are the regulations on AI? It would be basically none. There have not been regulations put in place on this. So there is a caveat. It's likely to say dot, dot, dot yet. There have not been regulations yet.
I
When they,
look for the government, and since you kind of tapped into government style contracts, and you're right, there are no per se hard guidelines for AI agencies yet, but I do look for that to become a government department here in the near future, especially if you're going to have an agency dealing with government contracts. That there has to be boundaries, and you got to know what the limitations are, and if you fall within the scope of their requirements. Because if not, if it's just an open, uh, like an OK crowd type environment and whatever, I mean, who has control of that? So I do look for somewhere in the future to where, uh, people could say it's a bad thing. I don't, because you got to have boundaries to anything in any organization you look at. Throughout the organization, they have established boundaries and processes and controls.
Mhm.
And if things don't fit with inside those walls, you just don't fit at all. So I do look for somewhere down the road, someone's going to say, "Hey, man, we need as the government for those that are working on government projects now. It's not all AI, just things that are geared toward that line of work. Well, they're going to have to establish some rules and protocols. Otherwise, it's Katie bar the door."
And I foresee, my personal opinion is that I foresee these DARPA formal methods, these 10 rules for NASA software development, they're coming into play if you overlap government. So keep that in mind, throw that out there, put it in your back pocket, just research it. It's not imperative right now, but there is a possibility. And especially if you're dealing with high value contracts like I do. Anytime I overlap government, it's going to require a lot more regulations, NIST requirements, CMMC potentially. And those are a lot of work. Once you get into requirements, it's almost a full time position for an AI agent to keep up with.
Well, it's not only that too. Then, if you take all that, everything James just talked about, everything I've touched upon, now let's break it outside the U.S. territories to go international. Because now do you not only have potential regulations and things that you need to follow here within the United States, but then what are going to be the requirements of dealing with same said entity that might be outside the borders of the USA in another country? It's kind of like the whole thing with GDPR, which is the European cookie laws and all that. And although it hasn't directly hit here in America yet, certain aspects of it have, because I think there's a handful of states, California, Florida, Colorado, that I'm aware of, and I think one other, that require you to have disclaimers and the ability for an end user to opt out from their data being collected without prior acknowledgement. It's no different than AI. I look for that if there are processes or applications that are going to be exposed, or the ability to be used by forward-facing public entities, then there's going to have to be some stipulations and guidelines on how that data is procured, how it is stored and processed, because now you got a whole new world of dealing with the server side server security elements, how it's transmitted images, the whole ball of wax.
It is endless. You're going to feel overwhelmed whenever you get into regulation. But that's okay, because that's something that we are leading out front on. And our regulations are likely going to be a lot more than yours, even in manufacturing, even in critical infrastructure. We have overlap with some really big entities right now, so we can almost guarantee what we're talking about applies to us. And there's statements that go around like hack free code, um, making your code definitive at every level to know exactly what it can do, exactly how many calls are available. The machine learning side of AI isn't something you skip to go straight to vibe coding and hope that your code is secure. It probably will not be unless you define it to be. And so you can use these buzzwords I'm giving you to put into prompts. Make sure it fits these standards. Uh, Ask questions where you need to make sure that we develop a compliant product. These are things you can put in your prompts to prompt engineer a good software product, but you must be aware of this. Otherwise, you may get taken down in a day. You may grow up, have the best software on the market, and it's hackable. So therefore, it's
Takes one hit
one hit.
for a foreign bad agent to hack your software. And again, if your software is, accessible by public or other endpoint users, and they become affected as a result of your code allowing a malicious attack, just bend over and get right with Jesus, because you're fixing to be lawsuit heaven. It's the same thing in the web world. And of course, on the code side, James is the expert on this. You put things into Docker containers, seal them up, security on the server side. On the website end of things, it's no different. It's why when you hear the term like a VPS, or a virtual private server, or a dedicated server, as opposed to shared hosting, you got to think of shared hosting like you just went and leased a $2,500 a month condo in this really cool complex, but you have neighbors that you're shared hosting. As where if you come down to a VPS or dedicated server environment, that's you just built yourself $1.5 million luxury home on your own piece of property, and your closest neighbor is about a half a mile away. I know it sounds goofy, but that's ideally the separation of it, and the difference of how you're able to really solidify and lock down security. It's the same thing on code. How your code is housed, where it's housed, because obviously you got to have, like James said, the proper structure to begin with. Just call something like Bolt, Replit, Firebase, whatever you choose as a tool to generate some code. That code has to be codified and solidified for security purposes. Because and it may function as its own application just fine, but again, when you open that up to that public door, you got to make sure all the security bases have been properly put into place. Otherwise, again, the lawsuits you could be subjected to could just be, it could be ugly.
And not only lawsuits, but let's talk about the back of the internet of GDPR. So if you find yourself in non-compliance in a way that somebody comes to your door and asks you to produce artifacts or proof of your code and how you're storing it, just know the last person who touches your network in the last point of your network owns your network. So if you start letting people become your SOC 2 and now analysts, and you start implementing an IDMZ and let a company come in and control all of your back end of your network data because you're afraid of this, well, they own your data in GDPR. When you read it, it's just almost verbatim. He who owns the data owns the data. And if you gave it to them, then they own it. And there could be repercussions from that. You may lose your competitive edge. So this is where AI comes in, and the reason why we are augmenting with it, because it gives you the competitive edge back. You just have to do it the correct way. So as an AI agency model, right now there's people starting up all over the place, and they probably think this is crazy to talk about. It's in quarter 4. Let's just talk about that later. Let's develop now and do cybersecurity whenever we need to. If you do that, bud, get ready. You're going down. If you do not have your code at least baselined and PCA audited and know exactly what you have, that's where repositories come in. That's the reason I use Docker. It's the reason why I use a GitHub repository or Hugging Face. Whatever side you use as a repository, make sure your code is being tracked. Good, bad, or indifferent. If you do not do that, then you are negligent. Insurance isn't going to cover you. They're going to call you negligent. Your customers are going to be upset because there's only going to be one path for you. Wipe it clean. And hopefully you had a backup. And that backup was baseline, because if you don't have an idea of where you were and where you're at currently and what the differences between the two are, then you have to wipe it clean. There is
Yeah,
no
exactly. And again, if you're going to jump into any of these vibe coding environment, again, doesn't make a difference of your choice of tool. Again, whether it's Replit, Bolt, whoever, but pluck that code and drop it down into a serious tool for code editing, like maybe Sublime Text, or even something as simple as Notepad, Atom, or PyCharm, whatever. But when you run your code through something that knows the code base and how the syntax should be properly highlighted and laid out and its overall functionality, then again, like James brought up earlier, knowing how to prompt what you need in the way of properly secured code so there are not any back doors or processes that may be exposed, run that through an actual code editor, like I said, to have it run and then test it. Because keep in mind, what you might see in Replit or Bolt or Google AI Studio, whatever, based on what you give it that you want it to output, it's probably going to output it fairly simply and it looks cool. But does it mean it's fully functional for front end usage with all the security loopholes, all them doors closed? You got to think of it like this at night. When you go to bed, do you leave your front and back door wide open? No. You close it, you lock it. Why? Because you want to know that your family is secure and taken care of. It's no different with code. Doesn't make a difference what you're using it for, whether it's AI, personal adventure, some different business application. Folks, I can't stress this enough. Security on that code at the root level is paramount.
paramount. I agree. And then let's talk about the easiest step that gets missed a lot, and that is writing down what you do and then doing what you wrote down. So after you get a baseline, let's say you make a backup copy of your machine off into a different location and you scan that, you know all the software is there, you know how big, how many pieces, how you've got a baseline. Um, let's at that point write down exactly how you did that so you can do it again. How to make backups of my system. How about we write down what regulations do I need on my backups? Do I need an incident response plan for cybersecurity? Do I need to have my network pin tested so I can know where the current vulnerabilities are on all of my systems? That's that's going to be insurance requirements for bigger customers. Again, I'm speaking to my customers because they're typically bigger entities. But the smaller customer that think this does not apply to them, trust me, these corporate giants are going to come and smash you like a bug because they are in compliance. They're going to be built in compliance because they knew better the whole time. It's
Yeah, and when James is talking about compliance, even from a corporate level, and I'm going to bend this conversation a little bit, just back in the web direction. But there's this little thing that a lot of people don't think of in website design. It'll bite them quicker than anything in a lawsuit. It's called accessibility. There are literally tens of thousands of legal firms that exist whose only function in life is for someone to point out a website that doesn't cater to the full accessibility needs and requirements for a person who has any kind of ADA issues in their life. It's not a small deal. And you can sit there all day long and say, oh, well, that'll never affect my little rinky dink site. You go on and think that. I just hope you don't get sued for it.
and that's where Greg's taught me a lot on that subject as well. Having a good administrator. And here's something I want to point out from the professional viewpoint that I have. There are, when you hear cybersecurity, there's there's 15 hats of cybersecurity. You have DevOps, which is like your front running complete process makers, and everything's tested through them. You have analysts, you have staff members, you have managers that don't know shit most of the time. You got different levels of cybersecurity, and they're all completely different mindsets. You're not hiring one type of person to be an IT guy. You need an artist too, somebody who can come up with great ideas. There's just so many things that are different with each personality. Where you start is an administrator personality. They will get you in line with regulation. So if you want a website built, let me just foot stomp there, arcwebdesign.net. He does go over and keep your security on lockdown for under $200 a month maintenance fees, to get all the updates and get him looking at your website daily, watching your back. That is unheard of for price. You're looking at a $10,000 bill for corporate.
And I want to pounce on what James said because it hit home with me. For anybody that's ever worked inside of any kind of call center environment, sooner or later you've had to reach out to your IT team to submit a help desk ticket. And a lot of people get really twisted out of shape because they don't get immediate response from their so-called IT guy. But what they fail to realize, all these issues are categorized into what kind of bucket does it fall within, because as soon as your local IT guy gets that, they're not the ones who's diving into resolving the issue. They're having to send it off to the team who can. And depending on the size of the company, how many people they're serving, if you're talking a large organization with 15, 20,000 employees spread across a half a dozen states, well, you may not get a response till tomorrow. And It's not because your local IT guy doesn't want to fix it for you, it's because he can't. There's a team dedicated for that. Then once they fix it, send it back to the local IT guy, then he captures that all up and emails it back to you with how to correct it or that it's been done. So keep in mind, IT, security, all that, it comes in compartments and layers, and depending on the technicalities that are involved behind it, depends on how deep that workflow's got to travel.
And in my experience, I've been from the manager level all the way down into the weeds. So you've got 4 or 5 different hats of IT and cybersecurity with me. Greg's been doing this 30 years, 20 plus, and he's got a whole hat store he wears. He can jump in and out of about any hat anywhere. So, Greg, it's been 30 minutes. I don't want to.
Oh, don't keep me. I'm more concerned about you because I know you're the one's got to go to work tonight. I'm just going to
Yeah,
sit here and stare at my computer screen and pull my hair out.
yeah. I work third shift, and so I work third and first shift at this moment.
I just
But
work.
I just work. That's all I do. And on that note, thanks for joining us. Like, comment, subscribe, be part of our journey. This is a great journey to be a part of. We're trying to teach you from the ground up, build a niche, get a team, dominate your field, but definitely start with the right foundations. If you're going in front of customers, ask them questions such as, what regulations do you fall under for your IT department? What kind of RMF for cybersecurity, or different protocols from NIST to, you can go on forever, but these overarch the companies that you're working with, and you want to know that way you can build your code and the resiliency of your company in from the ground up. You want to make sure and try to go higher than where you currently are with regulation for yourself.
I'm going to slap this out there before it cuts us off because it's important. For any of you people out there that are, your business model is around any kind of medical provider, you need us, okay? When you start, you don't want to tackle all the compliances that are on the back end from HIPAA to NIST to a handful of other 3 and 4 letter acronyms that you have to meet compliance on. It's not an option. It's not a choice. You have to, or your business is over. But that's why you need a team of professionals that know what the compliance levels are to be able to provide you with set the tools you need to help your business grows. And that's why we exist.
It's exactly why we exist. Thank you, Greg. Thank you for your time, brother. Thank you, everybody out there. Have a great night, everybody.
See y'all next one.